If this moment has arrived on your screen, you may sense that something subtle has already begun, something moving beneath the surface, long before your finger ever tapped to press play. It isn't coincidence. It isn't random digital timing. It feels more like you've stepped into a moment that was quietly woven into your field long before your conscious mind caught up. You might notice a faint tug in your awareness, as if a deeper part of you has been calling for a message you couldn't name until now. That pull isn't about the video itself. It's about a pattern, what I'll call the quantum sequence, that's been waiting for the slightest spark to activate. This sequence isn't my invention. It's older than language. It sits inside the very architecture of awakening, shaping how perception shifts, how identity loosens, how reality reorganizes itself when consciousness is ready to stretch beyond its familiar edges. And as these words slide into your awareness, the sequence stirs. Something that was dormant a minute ago begins to hum with new electricity. You may feel it as a tiny lift in your chest, a soft current in your spine, or the unmistakable sense that the ordinary moment around you has gained a strange depth. This isn't your mind fabricating meaning. It's the field within you recognizing a frequency it's been searching for, responding to a call that feels both new and ancient. Mystics across cultures pointed to this moment using different symbols. Some described a direct recognition that happens faster than thought. Others spoke of a transmission that bypasses language entirely. They knew that when awareness touches a precise threshold, a chain reaction begins, one that doesn't unfold step by step but erupts all at once, shifting everything from the inside out. And once this shift begins, it's nearly impossible to retreat from it, not because you're bound, but because some deeper intelligence within you has glimpsed possibility. It has brushed against something true, and what has been seen even for a breath cannot easily fade back into forgetting. This is why the message reaching you now is surfacing at exactly the moment you're able to receive it. Something in you knows before the mind understands. Something in you knows before the mind understands. And it's from that quiet knowing that the first signal rises. Not loud, not dramatic, more like a whisper under your ribs or a shift in the pressure behind your thoughts. That's where the unseen trigger mechanism lives, not in ideas, but in sensation, timing, and the strange intelligence of your own inner field. You may not realize it at first. Most people don't. The beginning of a sequence rarely shows up with flashing lights. It tends to arrive disguised as a feeling you can't categorize or a moment that feels slightly more alive than the one before it. You catch yourself pausing mid-breath without knowing why. You feel a pulse of recognition with no clear source. Something inside leans forward before you ask it to. This is how quantum-level shifts often begin not as epiphanies, but as subtle internal adjustments, like a camera lens sharpening itself before the picture comes into view. And yet something deeper keeps whispering. It tells you that you're not imagining the tension underneath the ordinary. It tells you the timing isn't accidental. It tells you there's a reason your awareness feels suddenly brighter in the exact moment it lands on certain words or sensations. The trigger isn't external. The video, the message, the moment, those are just catalysts. The real activation happens in the split second when your inner frequency clicks into alignment with something it's been circling for years. But follow this thread further, because the trigger mechanism isn't just a feeling, it's a pattern. A shift in your perception that announces itself through small distortions, conversations feeling unusually symbolic, coincidences appearing closer together, or a sense that something inside you is repositioning itself with a purpose you can't articulate. You may notice you're paying attention differently, listening with parts of yourself that were dormant, seeing meaning in places you used to ignore. There's a quiet recalibration happening under your awareness, your attention tuning itself the way a radio sharpens onto a frequency it always had the capacity to receive, but never fully allowed. Here's where it gets stranger and more familiar. You may start sensing things a few seconds before they happen, like you've stepped a fraction of a second ahead of time. You may feel your intuition warming up, sending little sparks through your body that don't match your old mental logic. You may catch yourself anticipating outcomes without knowing how you know. These are early signs that the trigger mechanism is active, not supernatural, but deeply natural, like the nervous system remembering its original design. And beneath that, another truth waits. Your inner field has been preparing for this. All the restlessness, the dissatisfaction, the unexplainable longing, those were not problems. They were pressure points. They were the buildup before a shift, the way an arrow pulls back before it releases. When the trigger arrives, it's almost never the trigger itself that matters. It's the readiness that allows the trigger to land. Think of it like walking into a dark room and touching a switch you didn't know existed. The light floods in not because the switch is powerful, but because the wiring was already there waiting. The activation doesn't create something new. It reveals what had been hidden under layers of old perception. This is the unseen mechanism recognition. A moment when the deeper you nods in acknowledgement before the conscious you catches up. A moment when the inner architecture shifts so slightly you barely feel it, yet so profoundly it begins rewriting how you move through the next hour, the next day, the next chapter of your life. And this is where the pattern sharpens. Once recognition occurs, reality begins responding differently to you. You're not forcing anything. You're not trying to create meaning. Instead, you're noticing meaning that was always there, filtered out by a mind trained to see only what it expects. The shift is subtle, but the implications are enormous. Life becomes less random. Symbols begin to align, signals intensify. It's not that the world has changed. It's that you've changed the part of you that perceives the world. This is the heart of the unseen trigger, a pivot so quiet you could miss it, yet so total it begins altering your trajectory from the inside out. Let the next piece land gently. The trigger is active. The mechanism has started. And what unfolds from this point is the beginning of a deeper architecture revealing itself. As that deeper architecture begins to reveal itself, you may sense that the shift wasn't just a feeling, it was the first glimpse of the structure you've been living inside without ever seeing its beams. The architecture beneath awakening isn't theoretical, it's experiential. It's the quiet framework shaping the way your consciousness rearranges itself when an inner threshold is crossed. Imagine standing in a familiar room when suddenly the walls turn transparent. Nothing has changed, yet everything has. That's what it feels like when the architecture becomes visible, not as a blueprint you read, but as a texture you sense behind your thoughts, behind your breath, behind the rhythm of your days. But notice what happens next. Where once your life seemed like a string of unrelated events, you begin to feel an underlying order, a subtle scaffolding connecting moments that used to feel random. You may even sense the faint outline of a progression, as though your experiences were stepping stones arranged with uncanny precision. This is not fate in the traditional sense. It's not predestination. It's the recognition that consciousness evolves through recurring patterns. And those patterns have been guiding you long before you knew to look. And yet something deeper keeps whispering. It says there is structure here, not rigid structure, but organic design, the kind we see in the spiral of a seashell, the branching of lightning, the unfolding of a fern, patterns that repeat because they reflect the physics of growth. Your awakening follows the same language, not a linear march, but an elegant unfolding. This is where the architecture comes alive. You may notice stages in yourself, shifts in curiosity, disruptions in old identities, new questions arising from places you can't trace. At first, these come like isolated weather patterns. Then, slowly, they begin forming a climate. Your inner world moves from scattered events to coherent seasons. Consciousness doesn't expand in a straight line, it expands through phases, each one preparing the conditions for the next. Then a new layer reveals itself. You start recognizing tension not as a mistake, but as the pressure that precedes structural change. You sense that moments of confusion aren't failures. They're dissolving old frameworks to make room for the next configuration of self. It's like a building that must shed its scaffolding once the foundation supports the load. Even the disorientation serves a purpose. It softens the rigidity that kept the old identity in place. But follow this thread further. The architecture is not theoretical. It lives in your body. You feel it when your breath drops deeper than usual. You feel it when awareness settles into your chest or belly with a newfound weight. You feel it when your thoughts suddenly loosen their grip. These are the energetic hallways, the inner corridors where transformation travels. Some traditions draw maps for these corridors, chakras, energy centers, ladders of consciousness. Others speak in metaphors, inner mansions, gates of perception, stages of seeing. You don't need to adopt any specific language. What matters is the pattern itself, an ascent that is not vertical, but inward, a movement that deepens rather than climbs. And beneath that, another truth waits. Awakening is architectural in another sense too. It reorganizes your sense of self, the way a new foundation reorganizes an entire building. Once the foundation shifts, every room shifts with it. Your preferences change, your thresholds change. The way you meet conflict, desire, silence, and intuition shifts as well. You find yourself responding to life from new vantage points, and sometimes you barely recognize the person you've become. This can feel disorienting, but the architecture is steady. It knows the sequence, it knows the order in which the beams must be replaced. It knows how to hold you as the old rooms collapse and new ones appear. This is where the pattern sharpens. You may begin to sense that you're not constructing this architecture, it's revealing itself to you. You're not pushing your way into the next stage. It's unfolding like a door that opens when you finally stop leaning against it. The architecture has always been here, waiting for your perception to rise to its level. And suddenly the world around you mirrors the internal design. Conversations take on new depth. Patterns in your life gain new meaning. Your inner blueprint starts syncing with your outer experience. And a strange harmony emerges, subtle, undeniable. This is the architecture beneath awakening, invisible until the moment you're ready to see it. Inevitable once the sequence has begun. When the architecture becomes visible and inevitable, something else follows almost immediately, the soft cracking of the identity you once called you. Not a dramatic shattering, more like the subtle sound a shell makes when it becomes too small for the life growing inside it. The dissolution phase begins quietly, so quietly you might mistake it for fatigue, distraction, or emotional static. But if you listen with the same awareness that recognizes the architecture, you'll sense the deeper movement. You may feel like pieces of your old self are loosening their grip. The routines that once defined you begin to feel oddly distant. The beliefs you carried without question start to wobble. Even the opinions you defended for years may suddenly feel like clothes that don't fit anymore. That's the first sign, the gentle erosion of certainty. But notice what happens next. The dissolution isn't a failure of identity. It's the pressure that comes when the inner structure upgrades faster than the self-image built upon it. You may find yourself standing in the same life you had last week, yet feeling like a stranger inside it. This is not regression, this is recalibration. The identity that worked for your previous level of consciousness simply can't hold the new frequency rising in your awareness. And yet something deeper keeps whispering. It tells you that you're not losing yourself. You're losing the casing around yourself, like a cocoon thinning from the inside, like a vessel softening so new light can enter. The discomfort is not a sign that you're moving backward. It's the signal that you've outgrown the old frame. Then a new layer reveals itself. Old relationships may begin to feel slightly misaligned. Not wrong, not broken, just quietly out of resonance. You may sense that conversations no longer land the way they once did. Familiar environments may feel energetically heavier. You may catch yourself noticing how certain situations drain you instead of feed you. This isn't judgment. It's clarity. When the inner architecture shifts, everything built around the old blueprint becomes visible in a new light. And beneath that, another truth waits. Dissolution is not emotional chaos. Though it can look like it, it's not confusion. Though it can feel like swimming without landmarks, it's the natural unwinding of patterns that kept you tethered to a previous version of yourself. Sometimes this unraveling shows up as restlessness, sometimes as irritability, sometimes as a quiet sadness that doesn't belong to anything specific. These sensations aren't problems, they are the threads pulling free, making space for the next structure to emerge. This is where the pattern sharpens. The dissolution phase carries a paradox. Everything feels like it's falling apart, yet something beneath the collapse feels more stable than ever. You may not be able to explain it, but a deeper self begins to trust the process, even as the surface self resists it. Part of you panics at the loss. Another part exhales. This inner split isn't an error, it's the gateway. The identity dissolves in layers, and each layer reveals more of the awareness that has been silently watching your entire life unfold. But follow this thread further. The breakdown of the familiar often precedes the breakthrough of the true. You may find yourself letting go of roles that once defined you, allowing old ambitions to fade without guilt, questioning the pace you once ran at. Even the way you speak to yourself may soften. The dissolution works from the inside out, loosening habits, dissolving defenses, dissolving the subconscious stories you inherited or constructed to survive earlier chapters of your life. And yet the whisper remains, this is necessary. Like soil breaking open before a seed rises, like night deepening just before the first hint of dawn, dissolution is not the end of you. It's the end of what restricts you. This is the identity softening the sacred unmaking that prepares you for emergence. You are not losing yourself. You are loosening yourself. You are becoming spacious enough for the next version of awareness to breathe through you. The dissolution is the invitation. The architecture is the guide. And the self that's unraveling is doing so because something larger is finally ready to emerge. As the emergence waits beneath the dissolution, there comes a moment when the soft unraveling turns into something sharper, a threshold you can feel without seeing. It doesn't announce itself with clarity. It doesn't arrive with certainty. More often, it appears as a quiet crossroads inside you, a subtle awareness that the old way of being simply can't be sustained. You can pretend nothing's changing, but your inner field knows otherwise. This is the threshold moment, the kairos instant, not ordinary time, but charged time, a space where something in you leans forward before you consciously choose to move. But notice what happens next. Kairos doesn't care about your calendar or your comfort. It doesn't wait for the perfect conditions. It emerges at the precise moment when the inner architecture becomes strong enough and the old identity becomes thin enough for the leap to appear. You may feel it as a pressure behind the heart or a tug in the gut, or a single thought that arrives with surprising weight, "I can't keep living like this." That sentence, whether whispered aloud or felt silently, often signals that you've stepped into the threshold zone. And yet something deeper keeps whispering. It tells you the choice isn't external, even if it looks that way. The threshold moment rarely starts with grand decisions about careers, relationships, or homes. It usually appears in intimate internal territory, the decision to stop betraying yourself, the choice to stop shrinking, the refusal to continue numbing what you know is true. These internal pivots create external ripples. Then a new layer reveals itself. You begin noticing that fear arrives right when the threshold opens, not because you're in danger, but because the ego tightens its grip when it senses it's losing control. The fear isn't evidence you're doing something wrong, it's proof you've reached the edge of real transformation. The mind trembles at the unknown. The deeper you feel strangely calm beneath it. This inner contrast is the hallmark of Kairos. But follow this thread further. Kairos isn't a single moment, it's a field, a window of probability, a corridor where multiple timelines feel reachable, and the one you choose is determined by the quality of presence you bring to that moment. When you're inside that corridor, ordinary decisions carry extraordinary weight. A simple yes or no becomes pivot point, not because the choice is dramatic, but because your inner state has elevated to a frequency where choices reorganize reality. This is where the pattern sharpens. During the threshold moment, time behaves differently. Hours stretch, minutes feel symbolic. Even silence feels alive, as though the space around you is holding its breath. You may feel guided without knowing where the guidance is coming from. You may sense that something in your future is reaching back toward you, gently nudging you through the doorway. This is Kairos not as myth, but as lived experience. And beneath that, another truth waits. You don't cross the threshold through effort. You cross it through honesty. The honesty to admit what you feel, even when it disrupts your life. The honesty to acknowledge what's dying inside you, even when it's inconvenient. The honesty to allow what wants to be born, even if you can't yet describe it. Thresholds don't require perfection. They require sincerity. This is why so many people sense the threshold but avoid it. It demands authenticity. It demands vulnerability. It demands that you listen to the part of you that cannot be reasoned with, or silence the part that already knows the direction, even if the details remain hidden. Then the moment arrives quietly, unexpectedly, when you realize the choice has already been made at a deeper level. You're not stepping into a new chapter. You're stepping into alignment with what your consciousness has already chosen. The act of crossing the threshold becomes less about courage and more about agreement with your own evolution. And this is where Kairos turns into motion. A subtle yes forms inside you. A breath drops deeper. A clarity rises that feels older than your mind. You take a step, maybe literal, maybe symbolic, and the moment crystallizes around you. The threshold isn't behind you or ahead of you. It becomes the air you're breathing, the moment you inhabit, the space where transformation becomes inevitable. This is the threshold moment, the pivot where dissolution becomes emergence, where fear becomes guidance, where time becomes the invitation to step into who you're becoming. As you step into who you're becoming, another force rises to meet you, something quieter than courage and more precise than willpower. It's the shift from trying to direct your awakening to allowing it to unfold through you. This is the moment when surrender stops being a poetic concept and becomes a living technology woven into the fabric of your transformation. Most people misunderstand surrender. They imagine it means giving up, collapsing, or letting life drag them wherever it wants. But surrender in this context is nothing like passivity. It's an alignment, a stance, a frequency where resistance dissolves and your inner architecture moves freely again. But notice what happens next. Once the threshold opens, your old strategies begin to lose their effectiveness. Pushing stops working. Overthinking becomes exhausting. The mind that once felt sharp now feels clumsy when trying to manage the unfolding. You reach a point where forcing yourself forward feels like walking upstream, while the river is clearly pulling you in another direction. That friction is the first sign that surrender is calling you, and yet something deeper keeps whispering. It tells you that surrender isn't an abandonment of your power, it's the redirection of it. When you stop fighting the current, your energy stops scattering. You feel a coherence forming inside you, like your breath, your body, and your awareness are finally facing the same direction. You realize the flow you've been resisting carries an intelligence far more refined than the plans you've been clinging to. Then a new layer reveals itself. Surrender begins to show up in 3 dimensions. First, the mental one, where you release the illusion that you must understand everything before you move. Second, the emotional one, where you stop suppressing the waves and let them pass through you without needing to assign meaning. And third, the somatic one, where your body softens its armor, your shoulders drop, and your nervous system remembers the feeling of safety without guarantees. These layers don't open all at once. They open in rhythm, like doors unlocking in a sequence. The mind softens first, then the emotion moves, then the body exhales and the cycle repeats. But follow this thread further. Surrender isn't about avoiding action. It's about letting action arise from a place untouched by fear or compulsion. You may find yourself taking steps that feel strangely effortless, even decisive steps, because they come from clarity instead of pressure. They emerge from your deeper architecture, not your survival instincts. This is what mystics meant by grace, the feeling of being moved rather than the one doing the moving. This is where the pattern sharpens. You'll begin noticing moments when you try to take control again. The mind will attempt to reassert its authority, to plan every detail, to secure every outcome. When this happens, the discomfort returns instantly, the tightness in your chest, the shallow breath, the sense of pushing against an invisible wall. These sensations aren't failures. They are signals pointing you back to alignment, back to the intelligence of surrender, and beneath that, another truth waits. The quantum field responds differently to a surrendered state, not because surrender is magical, but because it eliminates the static created by resistance. When you relax your grip, your inner frequency becomes coherent again. Coherence acts like a tuning mechanism, aligning your thoughts, emotions, and actions into a single vibration. And reality mirrors that coherence with startling precision. Synchronicities increase. Opportunities flow more naturally. The next step appears without strain. You're not controlling the field. You're harmonizing with it. This is the secret of surrender as a technology. It creates resonance. And resonance reorganizes reality. But notice what happens next. Surrender deepens into trust, not blind trust, but experiential trust. You start remembering moments from your past where life unfolded perfectly despite your fear. You notice how often the best outcomes came from events you didn't plan. You realize that the intelligence guiding your evolution has been present all along, whispering to you through intuition, timing, and inner knowing. This realization marks the subtle turning point. You stop asking, "What if I let go and everything falls apart?" and begin asking, "What if holding on is the only thing blocking my becoming?" This is surrender as a living technology. It doesn't shrink you. It unveils you. It aligns you with the architecture already rising within you. Everything that dissolves creates space. Everything that softens reveals direction. Everything you release becomes an invitation for the sequence to carry you forward. Surrender is not the end of your power, it is the beginning of your coherence. When the beginning of your coherence settles into your system, the world around you begins to shift in ways you can't quite explain. It's subtle at first, like the faint rearranging of furniture in a room you thought you knew by heart. You feel the same space, but the angles change. The air feels different. The familiar no longer fits the way it used to. This is when life begins reorganizing around you, not because you wished for it, not because you forced it, but because coherent energy naturally pulls reality into new arrangements. The way a stronger magnetic field pulls iron filings into sharper patterns. But notice what happens next. The people you used to resonate with may start behaving differently. Some withdraw without conflict. Some lean in with unexpected closeness. Some show up as mirrors, revealing parts of you that were previously hidden. The shift isn't about hierarchy, it's about frequency. As you step deeper into coherence, your field becomes clearer, and clarity is a powerful filter. Relationships that once felt safe may suddenly feel tight. Conversations that used to energize you may feel hollow. Situations you tolerated without question may become strangely unbearable. This isn't your sensitivity increasing, it's your alignment sharpening. Your internal calibration has changed, so the external world must reorient itself around the new you. And yet something deeper keeps whispering. It tells you not to cling, not to force old connections to behave like new ones. It reminds you that coherence doesn't break relationships, it reveals them. Some were meant for earlier chapters, others are meant to grow with you, and a rare few only appear once your energy stabilizes to the frequency they inhabit. Then a new layer reveals itself. Life begins to respond faster. Opportunities that once arrived sporadically begin clustering. Synchronicities tighten their timing. Patterns emerge with mathematical precision. It's as though the external world starts echoing your inner architecture, forming orbit lines around the gravity of your becoming. You might notice you're no longer chasing anything. Instead, things gravitate toward you: ideas, people, invitations, insights, not as rewards, but as byproducts of coherence. When your inner and outer states no longer contradict each other, you stop generating friction, and life rushes in to fill the vacuum that resistance once occupied. But follow this thread further. This reorganization is not always comfortable. Even expansion has its disorientation. You may find yourself grieving the old rhythm of your life, even as the new one feels more aligned. There's a strange ache that comes when you realize you've outgrown parts of your own story. A subtle mourning of versions of yourself who carried you far enough but cannot walk with you into the next corridor. This grief is sacred. It softens the path ahead. This is where the pattern sharpens. Your environment begins rearranging itself too. Places you once frequented may feel energetically dense. New spaces may feel inexplicably familiar. You might feel drawn to different routines: morning walks instead of late-night scrolling, deeper conversations instead of small talk, creative impulses instead of numbing habits. These shifts are not random. They're spatial recalibrations. The world molding itself around the field you're generating. Even time reorganizes. Your hours stretch when you're aligned. They collapse when you resist. Moments of clarity seem longer. Moments of confusion pass quicker. The coherence inside you becomes a quiet orchestrator, adjusting your experience without asking permission. And beneath that, another truth waits. Reorganization isn't about gaining more control. It's about releasing the illusion of control so the deeper intelligence within you can surface. You may feel as if life is nudging you into new directions without consulting your preferences. But look closely, every nudge matches a desire you've carried inside, sometimes for years, long before you had the courage to name it. This is the paradox of coherence. You feel guided from outside, yet the guidance comes from within. You feel pushed forward, yet it's your own evolution doing the pushing. And notice what happens next. Once the reorganization stabilizes, something remarkable emerges: a new ease. Not laziness, not passivity. Ease as in frictionless movement. You walk into conversations with more presence. You navigate challenges with less panic. You sense which choices vibrate at your frequency and which do not. Life stops feeling like a maze and begins feeling like a path, a winding one, but a path nonetheless. This is life responding to coherence. This is coherence responding to life. The sequence moves you. Your field rearranges the world, and the world reshapes you in return. This is the reorganization phase, the dance between inner alignment and outer transformation, where everything that no longer resonates loosens, and everything meant for your becoming finds its way to you effortlessly. As the outer transformation synchronizes with your inner alignment, another dimension of the sequence begins to stir, one that bends the way you experience time itself. Not in the dramatic science fiction sense. In the subtle, intimate way your awareness starts slipping between moments, catching echoes of something that hasn't happened yet, or that already happened in another version of your life. This is where nonlinear time enters the architecture of your awakening, not as a belief, as a sensation. You may feel it first as déjà vu, with a different flavor, less like repetition, more like recognition. A moment arrives and your body reacts before your mind catches up. The scene feels familiar, not because you've lived it before, but because some part of you has brushed against it in the field of potential. But notice what happens next. These flashes begin clustering. You think of someone and they message you seconds later. You consider making a change, and suddenly the exact opportunity appears. You walk into a room and feel like you've stepped into a memory you haven't lived yet. These aren't coincidences, they're signals that your consciousness is slipping out of strict linearity and into a more fluid mode of perception. And yet something deeper keeps whispering. It tells you not to cling to these moments or inflate them. They're not meant to be trophies. They're calibrations. They show you that the boundary between before and after is thinner than you've been taught, and that your awareness is beginning to perceive information stored outside chronological order. Then a new layer reveals itself. You start experiencing what I'll call future sense, an intuitive pull that feels less like guessing and more like remembering the direction your life is already leaning toward. You know which path is aligned before seeing the evidence. You sense which choice will unravel you and which will open you. The mind thinks it's strategizing, but the body already knows. This isn't prophecy. It's coherence extended across time. When your field stabilizes, it stops scattering energy into fear-based futures. And when that noise quiets, you can actually feel the path that matches your highest alignment. The future stops being a distant unknown and becomes a resonance, a vibration you can detect before events take form. But follow this thread further. Nonlinear time doesn't just reveal the future, it also rewrites your relationship to the past. Old memories may surface with new insights attached. You may suddenly understand why certain events unfolded the way they did. You might even feel compassion toward versions of yourself you once judged harshly. This is because you're no longer viewing your past as a series of fixed events. You're seeing it as a dynamic landscape shaped by the level of consciousness you held at the time. The moment you shift frequency, the meaning of your past rearranges itself. This is where the pattern sharpens. Synchronicities increase not in quantity, but in precision. They stop feeling like random sparks and begin to function like road signs, intelligent, timely, and eerily specific. You may notice repeating symbols that seem to speak directly to your inner questions. numbers that show up exactly when you doubt yourself, words overheard at the precise second you needed them, songs that answer your unspoken thoughts. This isn't magic, it's feedback, a conversation between you and the field. As your perception expands beyond linear time, you start catching messages that were always present but previously invisible, like hearing a frequency your radio couldn't tune to before. And beneath that, another truth waits. Time becomes holographic. Moments reflect one another. A conversation today connects with a dream from months ago. A decision this morning resolves an inner conflict from years back. A stranger's sentence echoes a thought you had last week. The boundaries between timelines soften, and you begin to sense the deeper intelligence weaving them together. This can feel disorienting, but also profoundly comforting. You realize you're not wandering through life blindfolded. You're participating in an exquisitely timed unfolding where past, present, and future collaborate in ways the linear mind cannot comprehend. Then something remarkable emerges. The more you allow nonlinear perception, the more anchored you become in the present moment. This seems contradictory, but it's not. When you stop fearing the future and stop clinging to the past, presence becomes effortless. You're not escaping into timelessness, you're embodying it. This is nonlinear time as lived experience, a softening of boundaries, a widening of perception, a recognition that the self moving through time is less rigid and more fluid than you once believed. Life stops feeling like a straight line. It becomes a field one you can feel, navigate, and converse with. This is the gift of the sequence, a new relationship with time itself. When time stops feeling like a line and starts feeling like a field, something profound begins to ripple through your body. Awareness is no longer just something happening in your mind, it becomes something your entire system participates in. You don't simply observe reality, you inhabit it differently. And this is where embodiment enters the sequence, not as a concept, but as a lived cellular experience. Because once your perception shifts, the body must follow. It's inevitable, it's part of the architecture. But notice what happens next. Your breath changes first. It drops lower, becomes rounder, less frantic. You might not even notice the exact moment it shifts, only that suddenly your chest feels less cramped. Your spine feels more awake. Your presence feels fuller in your skin. You're not forcing anything. Your body is reorganizing itself to match the consciousness you've stepped into. This is embodiment, the frequency of your insights landing in your muscles, your bones, your nervous system. And yet something deeper keeps whispering. It reminds you that embodiment isn't about perfection. It's not about transcending your humanity. It's about inhabiting your humanity more truthfully. You may still feel fear, but you'll notice it moves through you instead of camping inside you. You may still experience doubt, but it no longer hijacks your internal narrative. You may still have thoughts that contradict your truth, but they pass like weather rather than defining your climate. Then a new layer reveals itself. Your nervous system begins recalibrating, not in dramatic surges, more like subtle pulses of release. You might feel warmth in your hands for no reason, or tingling near your sternum, or a heaviness in the legs that anchors you more fully in the present moment. These sensations aren't random. They're your body learning to hold the coherence that your awareness has already accepted. They're the physiological echoes of inner alignment. But follow this thread further. Embodiment also transforms the way you relate to other people. When you occupy your own presence fully, you stop leaking energy into roles, performances, or expectations. Conversations become cleaner, boundaries become clearer, not rigid but organic. You start feeling when your yes is real and when it's a disguised no. You stop over-explaining. You stop negotiating your intuition. You stop abandoning yourself to maintain old identities. This isn't rebellion, it's resonance. Your body refuses to inhabit the spaces your soul has already left. This is where the pattern sharpens. Embodiment changes how you move through everyday interactions. You'll notice you listen differently, not waiting for your turn to speak, but actually hearing the space between someone's words. You'll notice you speak differently too, less filler, less armor, more truth, more presence. Even your silence carries a different quality, as though something in you has become a tuning fork that others can feel without understanding why. And beneath that, another truth waits. Your inner guidance becomes unmistakable, not louder, quieter in the way rivers are quieter than storms, steady, consistent, felt rather than thought. You may notice the guidance shows up as sensations before thoughts, expansion in the chest when something is aligned, contraction in the belly when it's not, a lightness that says yes, a heaviness that says no. The body becomes an oracle, not predicting the future, but revealing your path. But notice what happens next. As you embody this frequency, conflict loses its teeth. Challenges still arise, but you meet them from a different altitude. The old reactive patterns don't stick the same way. Instead of spiraling into panic or overthinking, you find yourself returning to presence more quickly. The space between trigger and response expands. You find room to breathe inside moments that used to collapse your awareness. This is embodiment turning into stability. Then something beautiful emerges. You begin to experience yourself as part of the field, not separate from it, not metaphorically, somatically. When you walk into a room, you feel the room. When you speak, you feel how your words ripple. When you choose, you feel how the choice vibrates through your future. Life becomes relational in a deeper way. You're not imposing your will on reality. You're participating in a dialogue with it. And slowly, the recognition lands. You are the field in motion. You are the awareness expressing itself through form. You are the bridge between the internal architecture and the external unfolding. Embodiment is where the awakening stops being an idea and becomes your way of existing. It's where transformation settles into your skin, your breath, your gestures, your choices. It's where the quantum sequence begins to live through you quietly, naturally, unmistakably. This is embodiment not as performance, not as posture, but as presence that reshapes the world simply by inhabiting itself fully. When presence begins reshaping the world simply by inhabiting itself, something irreversible starts settling into your awareness. Not dramatic, not loud, more like a door behind you quietly clicking shut, a door you didn't realize you'd walked through until you hear the latch. That sound, that subtle finality, marks the moment when the sequence stops being a phase and becomes the new baseline of your consciousness. You're not trying to stay awake anymore. You are awake, and the self that once clung to the old world no longer fits inside your skin. But notice what happens next. The changes that once felt disorienting now feel natural, as if they were always meant to replace the patterns you outgrew. You look back at the earlier versions of yourself with compassion, even gratitude, because you can finally see how every survival strategy, every fear, every hesitation was a stepping stone that led you here. But you cannot step back onto those stones anymore, not because you're forbidden, but because your consciousness simply won't shrink to fit your old container. This is irreversibility not forced, but realized. And yet something deeper keeps whispering. It tells you the path forward doesn't require effort to maintain. It requires honesty to honor. The clarity you have now isn't fragile. It doesn't need guarding the way your old insights did. It doesn't need repetition to stay alive. It's woven into your perception, imprinted in your nervous system, encoded in the way you occupy your life. Then a new layer reveals itself. You start seeing how your choices emerge from a deeper intelligence, not from instinct or habit. You act with a steadiness that surprises even you. Decisions that once triggered spirals now feel straightforward, not because life has become simple, but because you have become coherent. You're no longer negotiating between fragments of yourself. There's an internal alignment, a unified field that carries you. This isn't confidence, it's recognition. The recognition that the awareness guiding you is not separate from you. It's what you've always been. But follow this thread further. Irreversibility doesn't mean perfection. You'll still meet confusion, fear, and uncertainty. The difference now is that you no longer mistake them for truth. They become weather passing through a sky you recognize as your own. You watch them. You feel them, but you don't collapse into them. And when you do stumble, and you will, you return faster. Not because you're disciplined, but because the gravity of your new consciousness pulls you back into alignment. This is the shift that cannot be undone. This is where the pattern sharpens. The new identity that emerges isn't an identity at all. It's spaciousness. A deeper sense of self that's not confined by the old narratives. You no longer ask, "Who should I become?" because you've begun living from the part of you that isn't performing, striving, or proving. You're moving from essence now, not expectation, from truth, not habit, and beneath that, another truth waits. As the irreversibility settles, something else awakens service. Not service as obligation or duty, service as overflow. You realize that simply by being coherent, you affect the people around you. Your presence becomes a tuning fork. Your calm becomes permission. Your authenticity becomes invitation. You're not trying to change anyone. You're simply living at a frequency that naturally elevates the field you move through. This is why, in the later stages of the sequence, relationships deepen in unexpected ways. Some people rise to meet you. Some feel activated by your presence. Some drift away, not out of rejection, but because you represent a vibration they aren't ready to inhabit. And you no longer take any of it personally. You see the beauty in each path, the timing in each separation, the perfection in each connection. But notice what happens next. You catch glimpses of your life organizing around your new identity, not with force through alignment. Opportunities appear that fit the truth of who you are becoming. Creativity ignites in directions you never considered. Your voice becomes clearer, your intuition steadier, your actions more precise. You find yourself living from a center that feels immovable. Even when circumstances swirl around you, and slowly, the recognition deepens. You can't go back. Not to the old self, not to the old patterns, not to the old consciousness. The sequence has completed its arc, and the self that stands here now is the one you were always growing toward. This is irreversibility, not as a concept, but as lived reality. The transformation is no longer happening to you. It is happening as you. As the recognition settles that this transformation is happening as you, not to you, something gentler begins to unfold. The urgency softens, the edges loosen. The sequence that once felt like a surge becomes a steady hum woven through your everyday moments. There's no need to chase it anymore. No need to hold it tightly. What's yours is already living inside you. And notice what happens in this quieter space. Your breath moves differently. Your thoughts slow down without being forced. You feel a little more room in your chest, a little more ease in your steps. The world hasn't changed, but the way you meet it has. Even ordinary moments carry a faint shimmer, the subtle awareness that you're participating in life from a deeper center than before. This is the gentle part of awakening, the part most people overlook. Not the breakthrough, but the settling. Not the revelation, but the integration. And yet something deeper keeps whispering. It tells you there's nothing left to prove, nothing left to rush, nothing left to chase in order to validate what you've already recognized. The sequence isn't asking you to strive, it's inviting you to live, to breathe, to inhabit the truth that's been slowly shaping itself within you. This is where awakening shifts from experience into embodiment, and from embodiment into quiet knowing. Let this land softly. You don't need to know the next step right now. You don't need a grand plan. You don't need certainty to continue. All you need is presence and the willingness to stay open to what unfolds. If you feel called to keep exploring these deeper dimensions, if something in you resonates with the transmissions we journey through here, this channel will be waiting whenever you return. Not as a requirement, but as a resource, a companion, a place where the next layers of your awareness can find reflection. But whether you continue here or walk your path elsewhere, the essential truth remains: you've shifted, your field has changed, and life will meet you differently because of it. There is nowhere to rush, nothing to force, only the steady unfolding of who you're becoming.